Forum where we answer questions that you send to us about our research, related topics, even unrelated topics. This serves as an opportunity for us to help satisfy some of your own curiosities and queries, uh, trying to engage with a larger cohort of individuals, most of whom kind of gravitate around our Discord channel. It also just gives us an opportunity to kind of riff live. I'm not exactly sure what purpose that serves, but it is kind of a fun thing to do. So we do have some questions, and so we'll proceed to riff on them in our typical fashion. But before we do that, I suppose this is probably I, it's probably a perfectly fine venue for an announcement. I do have some news to share, which is that in the coming weeks, I will be resigning as CEO of the Institute in order to focus on research on the Langlands program, namely work on better explaining arithmetic Langlands as well as the geometric theory and applications to physics. Maybe I should say something briefly about this. So, Łukasz and I have been working on Langlands for some time. I've been working on it since, yeah, for quite a bit of time now. And originally, we had in mind a somewhat narrow scope for a Langlands-based project where we would use the theorems of Langlands, the kind of relationships between these, to explore some question of a rather computational nature. As Łukasz and I endeavored into Langlands, we began to develop the suspicion, or maybe you would call it hope, that we could take this rather beautiful research program and likely present it in a way that is more accessible to at least a broader cohort of graduate students, mathematicians, but also maybe philosophers and people who are interested in Langland. Um, we've been continually surprised and perhaps dismayed that Langlands is often regarded as kind of enigmatic or unapproachable or intangible or mysterious. It certainly certainly the labor barrier is quite high, and one has to uh, scour through a pretty large corpus of literature and piece together the picture, the overall picture of Langland's kind of article by article, piece by piece. And so with time, that became an utmost concern of ours. In the past, I've worked with Stephen on book production. So um, even one of Stephen's most recent books, I basically worked with him on it from pre-concept stage all the way to publication, basically touching most of the graphics and injecting a pretty substantial number of ideas. Nick did the same. Nick and I worked on that. So I'm no stranger to book production. Now, a book like a textbook on Langlands, like a visual and explanatory volume on Langlands, that would be a quite different book. Mathematically, it will be much more rigorous. Theoretically, it's deeper, but it's something that we think we can do. It's something that we want to work on. Now, this is not exactly the kind of project that the Institute was established to facilitate. It's much more computational in scope, and I think, I guess I could say two things about it. One is that I think Stephen has hoped that it will be a source of novelty, producing kind of new functions, new maybe persuasions or sensibilities when it comes to uh, doing computational work of various kinds. And I know from Stephen's perspective, he also wants the Institute to serve as a kind of a mouthpiece for his own ideas. And so a Langlands program exposition project is not exactly uh, it's not exactly commensurate with what we what what we originally had in mind for the Institute, but that's really what I want to do. I've really fallen in love with Langland's program, and I think that it would be, I think it's a contribution that I can make that I'd really like to make. And so Łukasz and I are going to depart quite soon. We're already working on Langlands, but we'll be essentially working on it full time and independently. We began a crowdfunding effort, and I suppose I could, yeah, we began a crowdfunding effort last week, and if you're willing and able to help support that effort, that support would be quite welcome. I myself will be leaving Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I currently live, in order to relocate to cities with lower living costs, and I plan to live really quite modestly over the coming 18 months or so as we as we write this. So it's an exciting time, but it's also it's also a time of considerable change. So I'm not exactly sure logistically what will happen. I'm not sure whether or not the community forum format will remain. It's not clear how the live streams will be organized in the future. I mean, Stephen will be running the Institute after I depart, and so it could be the case that these streams are simply facilitated by the same folks who facilitate the other streams for Wolfram Research. So stay tuned. We will keep you updated so so that you don't find yourselves um, trying to find streams about this work and being unable to do so. So we'll keep you updated in that regard. I think the research itself will also change in that at the moment we have fellows more or less pursuing independent research projects. You know, I'm in touch with them. We share updates. We have roundtables. I think in the future, Stephen will much more directly kind of dictate the scope of the projects being done, and people will be kind of working with Stephen or playing a somewhat supportive role as Stephen does different research projects. So I think you can expect to see the kind of research done, the way in which it's done, change, as well as on the media side, expect some changes there. But anyway, I should also take an opportunity to say it's been fun holding these community fora, and obviously it's been a wonderful opportunity working with you guys, Carlos, Nick, and Łukasz. Will continue to work together on Langland. So anyway, I just wanted to make a kind of a brief announcement. Maybe before I go, we can eat some virtual pizza or something. But yeah, it's not clear when I leave, though. If I disappear today, you should be worried, because that's not the idea. Someone call the police or something if I disappear today. So anyway, I'll keep you all updated amidst yeah, as we plan the final phase of this. But yeah, I just wanted to share that.
All right.
Łukasz, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, we'd like to hear from you as well, I think.
I think James said everything that James said everything that there is to say. I would like to have like the maybe farewell event before we really go. Maybe I'll prepare somewhat longer speech for that event. Yeah, we'll be living and working on Langlands, more or less like one book for now, and later we'll see what
So-
will turn into.
So I'm guessing people in the audience will be curious, and I am personally curious.
Yeah.
Like, what is the scope of this book? Is the book the main goal? Is the book going to be the byproduct of like some kind of research that you're going to pursue, or what is like the more detailed plan?
Yeah, sort of like I think James is really keen on the like book itself and explaining like the explanatory aspect of the book and producing it for other people to use. And me also, I really also want to do this. Yeah, but for me at least, as I have like this like really big amount of notes and everything, and the topic is huge. All the concepts involved, there are plenty, and basically I would like to make it make everything in my mind clean about the Langlands program, and yeah, the book be basically a like byproduct of that, and I have some other ideas for research, and I would like to use maybe like non-standard methods, so-called. Because yeah, I have some, I think, nice ideas how they can be applied to number theory.
So, for example, let's say how would it compare to something like an introduction to the Langlands program, which is this Springer textbook? I remember seeing that in my office. A couple of people had it, and I just googled it again, and it's exactly.
Yeah, we came through it. We came.
So how
Yeah,
does
so-
it compare to that kind of text?
We read everything.
So we've read through much of almost all of the introductory literature at this point. And so one thing about Langlands itself is that there is a kind of a macro level view that one can attain, and you can motivate the overall program at a rather high conceptual level. You can try to explain, here are the questions that we're trying to ask. Here's why here's why we use a certain kind of object. Here's why this particular theorem is relevant. Here's the kind of historical motivation for this. Every once in a while, if you read a chapter in an introductory book such as this, that kind of helpful treatment is offered, but it's not offered consistently. And so the kind of as we write down our own expository treatment of, say, a given aspect of the program, it often involves synthesizing like the greatest hits or the best explanations that we've seen across dozens and dozens of articles, where every once in a while someone will take the time to, beyond just writing down the formalism, try to explain even conceptually or strategically why this is a good choice of object, or why having this particular property is of use. And so that's one thing, which is that it is perfectly possible, because we see it done piecemeal, inconsistently, sparsely throughout the literature, to explain like, okay, this is the kind of question that we want to answer. This is the result that we'd like mathematically. And then here's how you proceed step by step to get towards that. It usually isn't presented that way. It's usually presented much more enigmatically, where you'll say, the piece will begin with, we're interested in taking solutions modulo P, for instance. And then, but you can explain carefully why you're interested in that, and what the consequences would be if you could get it, and how it relates to historical precedents, and so on and so forth. Another thing is that we can use software to produce visualizations, to compute specific examples, in order to help make some of these objects and relations and properties more concrete, and in order to help help relieve the reader of the burden of keeping track of a large number of abstract concepts without understanding, at least with respect to specific circumstances, how they actually work, what it actually looks like in practice to see this property hold, how you can show an example of, say, how this particular isomorphism works, or how these correspondences, to show some specific examples of these correspondences. Another thing is that the scope of Langlands is quite wide, and it's very rare to see a single author account for the majority of the program. There's always some aspect of it that is left unaddressed, and each author has kind of a particular style, and so very rarely are you presented with a more or less complete portrait. And some individuals kind of take the approach this is another frustrating thing. Some individuals kind of take the approach of like, okay, here's the formalism that should speak for itself. Others take the approach, let's explain the historical motivations. You'll find that someone someone employs a certain technique, they use a particular object, but they did that because they were inspired by a talk that was given at the International Congress like a year before, and that person was in turn inspired by this question that came from this theory. And you can kind of, there could be many more footnotes that are historical that explain, why these particular choices are made. Often, especially in kind of a brusque formal paper, that's excluded. Sometimes people do take the trouble to attend to all those details, but then they spend so much time doing that that they present an article that's rather imprecise or includes historical, like a kind of a wealth of historical information, but they don't properly explain the concepts well enough, and so then it's not clear how they actually fit together. So there's kind of the point I'm trying to make is there's a balance to be struck here between properly contextualizing and conceptually strategically motivating the Langlands program, providing adequate historical treatment so that the choices that are being made don't feel arbitrary, using visualizations to, at least for people who are visually oriented, help kind of realize these objects so that people can gain through, I guess, additional senses some understanding of how they work, providing with computation examples of particular instances of the relationships at play, and then doing this kind of comprehensively for the entirety of the program. There's like the kind of arithmetic case that launched Langlands. It's then been expanded into a geometric theory, and this geometric theory also parlays with physics. But these approaches can help inform one another, and you can include discussions where you say, okay, in the arithmetic theory you do this, and you can understand how this corresponds to what's done in the geometric theory. This relationship is also not well presented enough. Usually you'll have some mathematician, they have a particular orientation towards Lie theory or representation theory or sheaf theory or class field theory, and they are knowledgeable about these other areas, but they tend to concentrate on their area of expertise. And I think we can be more general and also more comprehensive and thoroughgoing in order to help the reader better understand how these various manifestations of Langlands relate to each other. So those are some examples of things we'd like to do. We also tried to provide a list with some concrete examples on the crowdfunding page of particular kind of contributions that we'd like to make that we haven't really seen in the introductory literature. So we're pretty familiar with the introductory literature, and there are some very nice pieces that are contained in that book. So like Introduction to the Langlands Program, Genesis of the Langlands Program. This is actually rather new, and there are a few others. We're pretty familiar with the treatment that's given there, and it's very helpful. The world would be a much more confusing place without this handful of volumes. But I think there's another step that can be taken from there in order to make it so that more graduate students and young mathematicians can view this as a legitimate topic for them to study.
Should we share the link with the viewers, the crowdfunding link?
Sure. I mean, I'm not going to say no. Why not? I mean, any penny helps.
Send away. Share it on the Discord or whatever.
Yeah, I will do that. Well, yes, we can hold some formal, once we know exactly what the plans are regarding our exit, we can hold some formal event, and we can make Łukasz give a speech, and Łukasz could play us a tune of some kind. maybe Nick can give a speech.
Yeah,
No way.
I don't think Nick is
May-
thrilled for that.
maybe Nick will ask, maybe Nick through ChatGPT and some other generative procedures can have like an avatar give a speech.
Oh, well, actually, just recently like set up Yandex API for text to speech, so we can speak Russian somewhat.
Nice.
So
Oh, really?
just for fun, yeah.
Yeah, this
Because
weekend I
I know
had
there's
a.
like
Go on.
there's like a lot of this chat book developments going on. There's like a recent post Steven made about LLM functions and chat book related features. So yeah, so I also have like some mini version of the same thing, but with a button that speaks Russian. So it's kind of fun.
Nice.
Yeah, I had a family gathering over the weekend, and at one point, people were giving speeches, and they basically just prompted some AI generated one, and I gave it, and everyone was like, "Oh, that was very nice," and then I said, "Well, it wasn't me."
You read an AI generated speech?
Yeah. I just read it. Like people had some speeches in it, like a few lines speech, and I was like, "Oh, that was so nice," and it's like, "Yeah, it wasn't me." Some kind of family time Turing test was passed.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll keep you all posted about that. I think we've probably. Well, wow. Okay, that took half an hour. Let's move on to some questions, shall we?
Did you send the link anywhere?
You want me to put? Are you suggesting I put it in the
I don't know
live
where.
stream chat?
I mean, I can put it in the chats now because I have access to them, or you can put it in the chats. It's just for the viewers. Where I mean, we have a few
Yeah.
viewers.
So okay. So here, I'll put it.
You can send it privately and then just forward.
Yeah, here. Sorry, I don't have. I don't have the YouTube
Yeah, I'll just.
window open.
Okay. So.
Thanks, Carlos. Yeah, and thanks for the follow-up question. That was yeah. That's always a good exercise to try and explain that.
I regard it as a very ambitious project, so best of luck. I mean, this is something quite
Either.
ambitious.
It's ambitious, but I don't know. There's something about I've realized with time, like there's something about just trying to take something like this and extract the key information that people need to know, and then to further embellish that information with other kind of resources and examples. There's something about that I really think we can do. I think it just hasn't been done because kind of expository work, maybe because of publish or perish pressures or other institutional pressures. I don't think it's rewarded enough. So as we say on the crowdfunding website, like we don't make the claim, which we shouldn't make, that we're like doing something that no one else could do, or that we have some special talent that no one else has. We don't claim that at all. It's just, I think it's just a matter of what you think is valuable, how you think you should spend your time in the mathematical world. And I just happen to think that trying to create something that can help more people understand Langland's program is worthwhile. For the record, like I think that we kind of saw this in category theory. Like there have been a number of people who have helped to make category theory more understandable, like Bartosz Milewski, Eugenia Chung, maybe like David Spivak and Brendan Fong. Like there have been people who have kind of helped make category theory more intelligible, because without that work, without that kind of culture, there's no reason why many people should know about or understand category theory, but they do. It's become increasingly popular, even beyond university pure math circles. And I mean, category theory is quite foundational. Langland's program is more of a specific research effort in number theory. But in general, if you're gentle with the reader and you consider it kind of just an act of public service, I think a nice introductory volume can be written. So yes, it's difficult work. It's a wonderful intellectual challenge, but I think it seems difficult in part just because it hasn't been done. But I think the reasons explain, like the explanation for why it hasn't been done, I think have less to do with difficulty and just more to do with an unfortunate, a slight disinclination towards math exposition within mathematical culture. Like most people are trying to do new work, especially if they're an aspiring young mathematician. Fewer people are going to spend their time like trying to make the concepts easier to understand. But personally, I think that doing that will, to kind of hint at what Łukasz was saying, I think doing that will, at least between the two of us, help us produce new ideas. I won't be surprised if that happens. But I think it will also better foster the production of new ideas and the adoption of new perspectives and help progress in general. So I'm not trying to be modest or to trivialize the project so that it seems easier than it is. It's difficult, but it can be done. It just hasn't been done for reasons that I think are more institutional than technical.
Yeah.
Yeah, like even these existing books, they're more like collection of papers than a textbook. And even though they're introductory paper, they're still like read more like a paper than a textbook. And I always got pretty angry at this Bourbaki-esque style in papers when you often need to spend your energy not on understanding math, not even just reverse engineering what author had in mind. Yeah.
A nice gentle treatment to Langland should begin with, here's what we're trying to do, not let K be a finite field. If your paper begins with let K be a finite field, it's like, as a reader just trying to understand the basics of what Langland's is, you can already tell that that the greater motivation or scope will not be shared with the reader at the outset.
Yeah, like it's fine to do papers like this if you have some result that you want to immediately communicate to your colleagues, but there should be a follow-up later in explaining what was your motivation and the idea.
So just to further publicize the viewers, I mean, reading the social impact and benefit of this project, I see that you say that as a cultural matter we often find ourselves rather surprised by the obscurity of the Langlands program, even among mathematicians. Having witnessed in the past the acceptance of certain areas of mathematics, most recently category theory, into a wider discourse, we feel as though Langlands could be more widely known and discussed. So I was wondering, what is the analogy with category theory here? What is the sort of wider mathematical community gaining from knowing about Langlands? I'm curious.
That's an interesting question. I mean, so once upon a time, before I investigated Langlands in greater detail, just based on what I had heard from kind of popular science writers, it seemed as though Langlands was this kind of grand, kind of unificatory project. And unfortunately, it's still described that way, as this kind of unified theory of math. It isn't really. I mean, Langlands is a modestly speaking, Langlands is an approach to class field theory and arithmetic geometry, but it does assimilate and operationalize concepts from many areas of mathematics. And so if you find one, I think if you find that anything that you're doing relates to um, arithmetic geometry or class field theory, number theory, but you have kind of avoided it because it hasn't been exactly clear how to begin to engage with it. This could provide a means by which you can engage with it. But also, I think if Langlands, as a general matter, is kind of well understood, then even if you're not working on Langlands, but you kind of are aware of Langlands and generally how it works, then then it could be helpful if, like, let's say you're working on something in sheaf theory or in Lie theory or in algebraic number theory, or you're working with, you're working in representation theory, you're working in these different domains. If you don't know that much about how concepts in your own domain transport to others, then Langlands, just knowing about Langlands, could be helpful. It's not this universal telephone book in mathematics where it tells you literally how to connect everything, but it is a kind of a complex. And so if you understand Langlands, if you have some general understanding of it at a conceptual level, I think that it could, for some people, make them aware of certain ways in which linkages between these different areas have been made, though with a strong caveat that the linkages are oriented towards specific goals, which means I wouldn't presume those links to be exhaustive nor general, but I think it's still worth understanding them and knowing about them. But I agree that it's not the same as category theory. It's not like Langlands is not like some fundamental set of techniques for doing general mathematics. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was wondering about because I'm familiar with the Langlands program. So I would be part of the target audience in a way.
Right.
But like, what do you see as what would be a success state for your book? Like, say you write it and 2 or 3 years down the line after publishing it, what is like a success state that you would assess? Okay, that was time well spent. Funders are should be happy that they funded us to go through this.
I guess one example would be like a young student, like maybe even an ambitious undergraduate student, says, I read this book, read it in my spare time, I read it over the summer, et cetera, and I understood the kind of the basics of Langlands. From there, it became clear as a master's student, the courses I should be taking, and I was able to kind of more strategically set myself up to do a thesis on this. Whereas in the absence of this book, it probably would have been the case that I would have had to have gotten lucky, or have found a specific advisor who could have taken me under their wing and have helped me. Like, this is something that I'm coming to appreciate more with time, because I've now met people. I've met people who have wanted to do PhDs on topics and haven't been able to. And Carlos, I don't know if you've heard these stories too, where it's like you have someone and they're basically like a late master's student, and they want to maybe at least do like a master's thesis on some topic, or they're a PhD student, they want to get into some topic, but they haven't planned far enough in advance. They haven't taken the right courses. They didn't know some subject well enough or everything that it involves soon enough, and so they just didn't work on it. That's an example. I think if this book can be used as a textbook in courses that people give, like to graduate students, even master's students, to help educate people, provide people with training, That in its own right would be a success. Um, I think personally, and this is, I don't know how important this is, but I'm quite dissatisfied with kind of popular exposition like Quantum Magazine, Scientific American exposition on Langlands. Now they have a difficult job in that, at least with a textbook, you get to write an entire textbook and you can have footnotes and you can cite widely and et cetera, et cetera. But I don't like the fact that Langlands is being introduced as this grand unified theory of math because I think it just makes it harder to understand because like as soon as you probe the details, it should become clear that it's not. I don't even know what it means to unify math. I mean, I don't know, Carlos, maybe you have a take, Łukasz, maybe you have a take on this, but I'm not even sure what that would really mean. So I think that, why is popular exposition important? Well, I think it could even affect things like funding. I think if potential benefactors or donors understand Langlands better, they might be more comfortable awarding funding to seeing it done. You could have more talks or conferences on the topic. I think that a better textbook, if it can also lead to better sensibilities amongst, if it can highlight themes that can be picked up by popular math writers, I think that could also contribute to a better understanding on the part of a broader group of individuals. And it's not exactly clear what the impact of that would be, but I'm hoping at the very least it could, for instance, make people who might otherwise not want to support Langlands, like maybe donors or other people who could be patrons of mathematics. It could make some people who are more reluctant to do it because they just view it as some highly arcane, rarefied topic of mathematics that should only be left to people at IAS and IHES and Fields Institute, et cetera, et cetera. If it can become clear that this is a topic like any other, and that many people could work on it, and more people are working on it, and there are more classes being done, and more people are writing theses on it, that's healthy for the research program. And Langlands is like an open research program, and it could be accelerated. And hopefully better understanding can help to do that.
Yeah, well, it's a very worthy goal. Hopefully it goes through.
Thanks.
Okay, so maybe we can spend the last 15 minutes of the stream answering one of the questions that was left on the Discord. So I'll just throw it in here. So McDougan Bagel asks, is the Rulliad an infinite space of computational rules? If so, would there exist finite spaces of computational rules in the Rulliad? Take the Earth, for example. Here is a possible finite region of space in the Rulliad undergoing rewrite applications which are changing the structure of space. If this is indeed happening, would it be reasonable to suggest that the expansion of branchial space in this finite region of space results in biological evolution? So, I guess, those are the questions, but there is here some connection between Rulliad and the biological evolution, and I don't know if we are better off just trying to find broad parallels or trying to make some kind of analogy or connection between these two concepts than directly answering. Because directly answering, I guess, is there really an infinite space of computational rules? I guess it's quite clearly yes, right? There isn't much to discuss there, and so I thought that we could take this because they add. I'm asking if it is possible that biological evolution is effectively expansion in branchial space. So there is some explicit question on, how does some kind of evolutionary dynamics relate to the Rulliad and so on. And I find this quite interesting. I think we mentioned it several times before. When I mentioned the work of Michael Levin and generally this idea of morphospaces or physiological spaces and things like that, where life seems to be navigating and searching for solutions in sort of evolutionary space of some kind. I mean, that certainly sounds like a reasonable analogy with Ruliad navigation of some kind. So, I mean, I think there's an interesting link here, and I guess we could just take this minutes to sort of express our thoughts on what the concept, how the concept of the Ruliad connects to the concept of biological evolution.
Well, Stephen has actually mentioned this to me in the past that at some point he wants to use basically these things called branchial graphs to try and model speciation in biological evolution. I think in the Stephen lingo, even if you look at branching relations, you'll make these branchial graphs, right, where nodes are connected, they share a common ancestor. That's like the term that's used. And I think this term common ancestor is like part of what led him to conclude, or led him to think like, okay, we could use this notion of branching to express speciation, and we could use these kind of graphs to to graphically show kind of common ancestry among species. Yes, but it's not clear to me, besides just the fact that you can have you know, like a graph that has these branches. Okay, now you have new species. It's not clear what you would do beyond that. And what I mean is, you know, usually you have branching because of rewrites, because you have there's like a multiplicity of rewrites that can happen at a given time. Either different rules can apply, or they can apply at different positions. And so my own view on the matter is like, yes, you could show speciation in terms of branching, but unless you're just going to doodle a picture, you'd have to have some mock notion where you're essentially trying to show mutation in terms of new rewrites, pattern matching, or something that's happening that's distinct from what's been done thus far. And yeah, maybe you can produce some kind of mock model of this. I think doing it in a way that accounts for every genetic, like, I don't know, trying to model genetic mutation more broadly via rewriting it seems difficult, because I think the number of possible mutations is very large. And so I'm not exactly sure what those graphs would look like. Maybe you could constrain it and you could try and look at specific cases of mutation. So yes, there's something that could be done there. But I think that the really difficult work is not the concept of branching in the biological case. It's more of trying to develop a rewrite model that's constrained enough to be tractable, but non-trivial and interesting, and also actually biologically accurate, and not just some kind of random, toy model.
No, I agree, but at the same time, I think, you, in some way, you hit the nail on the head by saying that, it's not that mutation needs to be implemented somehow like some rewrite. It is literally rewriting in some way, right? You have genetic material that has data-like structure, and a mutation is a literal rewrite of that structure. And recombination, more importantly, I think, is what it's enticing my imagination here more. Recombination in reproduction, in sexual reproduction, is, or not necessarily sexual, but recombination across genomes, like bacterial genomes and things like that. That is also rewriting. There is some purposeful kind of shuffling of genetic material that happens, which precisely promotes or sort of drives speciation and adaptation. So that's what I was referring to when I said that this question had some quite, in my opinion, quite firm ground,
Sure.
in the comparison, because obviously, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, this is impractical to just actually tackle genetics with a rewrite system, because it's going to be very computationally expensive. Although I would also say that, to what degree is this more computationally expensive than actually doing genomics, right? Like, in just trying to have databases of genetic information and so on. With the right architecture, I imagine you could approach this quite efficiently as well. But yeah, I mean, I find it's interesting, because when you reduce evolution to genetic evolution, which arguably is not the entire story, but I mean, it's a large part of it. When you reduce evolution to genetic evolution, there is some very direct kind of rewrite model that is kind of operating in the background. Now, of course, there's a great deal of randomness, at least seeming randomness, in mutations. But I mean, I think that the more we study evolution, the more we are realizing that the seeming randomness is very constrained or very controlled in some way. And all this epigenetics and all these kinds of phenomena that have been noticed, that, it's almost as if the rewrite rules themselves get affected by some kind of adaptation. So there is some selection within the rewrite rule space, right? So that's more kind of a Ruliad evolution in terms of genetic evolution, right? So I don't know. I think
right. That was the other thing I was going to add, which is, you see, if you want to actually model speciation, modeling speciation and modeling mutation are different. Yes, there are many kinds of mutations that are possible, and one slight mutation. I'm no expert, so forgive me, but I imagine that one slight mutation is in many cases not enough for real speciation. It's like but what actually leads to speciation? I mean, it's not just the fact that there's a mutation; it's that there's a mutation, and it affords some kind of fitness that survives in nature in some way. And so this is, if you're actually trying to model speciation, I think it becomes, on the algorithmic side,
Yeah.
you have to have many constraints. And how would you do this, where you have some rewriting, which I agree is kind of the straightforward part, but then you'd have to have some model where that's happening many.
Oh, wow. Zoom was not happy with James's answer, apparently.
Yeah, mutation happened.
Should we call the police? He did disappear.
He did disappear, indeed. So, Nick, I'm curious what you think about this possible connection.
Well, I was thinking more in the terms of like branching and evolution. More reminds me the connection is through the convergent one. So because if you just look at the like tree of life or something, it's just a tree. There's no merging happening. So the branchial space is completely boring. If you're going to describe it this way, it's going to be nice if you start to equivalence things with some phenotypes. Like maybe there are some different phenotypes evolved in different branches of your tree, like flight maybe evolved separately in insects and mammals and birds, So if you can start equivalencing and canonicalizing, maybe you can use the term, by some phenotypes, a convergent evolution will converge, and branchial space would be not trivial in a way.
With bacteria, you can have this horizontal gene transfer.
Yeah.
So, yeah, maybe that could be modeled as there would be a branchial space corresponding to that.
Yeah, that would be like a mechanism of converging your branches directly.
Okay, so McDougan Bagel is the universe within in the chat, and he's saying, my thought is that it could be that expansion of branchial space under certain conditions produces complex spaces which branch and merge. Um, but yeah, I think you both your comments. Indeed, so the tree of life. If you just see the speciation, I mean, speciation has been a human, mostly classical way of classifying life or organisms. Let's say. So, for example, the concept of species doesn't really apply to bacteria precisely because of what Łukasz said. Like, there is, I mean, there's no good definition of species of bacteria, right? Like, I mean, it doesn't. So it's more like you have genotypes, and those things are kind of sharing, and you have phenotypes. You have several genotypes for the same phenotype, and things like that. And I think when you take some quite small, relatively small space of phenotypes that correspond to genotypes, and then you have this correspondence of genotypes produce phenotypes, then you can start to see this convergence, right? Because you can have James. We thought we had to call the police because you disappeared.
Yes. If I disappear and you don't hear from me for like 24 hours, then definitely call. Maybe the police are not even the right people to call, but maybe the Justice League.
When you're in the area, I would call Homelander. But yeah, so we were just so McDougan Bagel is in the chat under the name The Universe Within, and they're asking, does it make sense that Earth itself could be thought of as a finite sample of the Rulliad? I mean, I think that question is.
I think it's a bit confusing, like a bunch of spaces there.
Yeah.
It's like there are so many different spaces floating around. It's like there's a rule space, just maybe some rules or maybe an actual stage that those apply it. There's a space as like spatial space, as a space we live in, and there's branchial space. So when you talk about Earth as a place, that's a usual space that you talk about. So you can't really describe it as some part of the real space.
I mean, I've tried to do this before, but maybe I'll do it one more time for good measure. Like this is what we were trying to do in Richard's case. Like, okay, you have computations. You can try to find some way to parameterize those spatially. But what is that space? I mean, it's simply an object that, as humans, we're positing theoretically in order to understand computation. I wouldn't, as soon as you start saying things like the Earth, some physical thing, is it a subspace within, real space? I mean, it's like, look, if you have if you find some computation which you think is a good computation for approximating the Earth, and it could be many, then yeah, that computation will be somewhere in some parameterized space. Maybe you find there are a number of computations where together, if you take a number of these, then it's a good model for the Earth. And it's completely unclear where they'll be, within some parameterized space. Maybe they won't even be near each other. So, I kind of just recommend avoiding taking too kind of religious of a view. It's like you have a space, the space can parameterize computations. Maybe that can tell us something about the nature of computations, but there's no need to believe that this is a kind of a deified thing that exists and we're living in, local manifestations of it. I mean, let's have some modesty. We're humans. We're working with computation. This idea of trying to parameterize or classify computation spatially is an interesting idea. But like, is the Earth a subspace of the Rulliad? I mean, I don't think it's I don't think that's really a. I mean, there are no bad questions, but I think that the question itself suggests this kind of presumption or a presumption that physical spaces are somehow kind of subspaces of this computational space. And I wouldn't presume that just because it's not clear what in the end, once you actually parameterize computations, that you're going to find that computations that are next to one another in some space have anything to do with one another.
Like,
What if it's the case? Yeah.
having finite amount of information, you cannot even decide if you're in the same point of the Rowleyard space as someone else. Like any finite amount of information, you won't be able to decide this.
Yeah, just to be a little more concrete, like, and this is again something that Richard was trying to address, though I think now he's basically shifted towards doing things on machine learning with Stephen. Like, if you try and parameterize computation spatially, you have to have some sort of a, like, you have to have some sort of a basic distance or metric, right? You have to be able to say, like, this computation is close to this other computation in space. And it could be because, like, the computations, either because it depends on what you're doing. If you're looking at rules, it's because you're expressing the rules in some way, and one rule differs from another rule in some very subtle manner. So if you're using like Fractran or something, the rules will differ in some slight manner. If you're looking at the way that the computations actually behave, it would be, the actual computation, one process differs from another process by some very small amount. You could also, do it. You could potentially, though I don't think it's even feasible theoretically or in practice, where you say, okay, let's look at the outputs of the computations and see how they differ. But as soon as you ask that latter question, like, let's try and parameterize computations by their output, that would just be like a classifying space for all outputs of computations, which is basically just like a space of everything and how much anything kind of differs from anything else, which I think is often, that's the kind of thing where someone would say, like, the Earth, there's this Earth and then there's Earth that's like slightly different, et cetera, et cetera. Would this be like some subspace within this space of all things? But the space of all things is different from the space of all computations. And I think there should be some modesty in, like, if you're actually looking at how much computations differ from one another, either algorithmically or behaviorally, like, yeah, it could be the case that computations that are good at approximating, different computations that are good at approximating some process or object, that they're very far away from each other in some space that classifies them. But again, and this is where the artifice of doing this kind of theory becomes salient. It really depends on how you want to parameterize your computations, because you can do it in all kinds of different ways, and you can kind of force it where you have some object and your object is being produced by a certain handful of computations working together, and because they're working together, then you put them close together in some space, and then in which case you could say, okay, yes, in this kind of neighborhood of this space, you have this output because this output is being produced by a number of these different computations, and you're putting it that way. But that's not a scientific discovery. You're just forcing the space that way so that it obeys that property. If you're trying to do it another way, more scientifically, where you say, well, let's try and parameterize these computations and let's see, how their locations in this space relate to their output. Well, we have no idea. We have no idea, and it's not clear to what degree it can even be done, because combinatorially, this kind of study explodes rather quickly. And as Richard found, questions of undecidability become they become detectable at a very early stage too. So, I guess in closing, I wouldn't make this kind of presumption that, like, everyday objects, even celestial bodies, that they're like occupying, that you can kind of pinpoint them in some space of computations. And I say that because as soon as you make that claim, then you've kind of pre-decided what the space is, and you've done it kind of arbitrarily. And I mean, you can do that, but then what's the point of studying this thing? What's the point of inquiring into its properties if we're just going to predefine it so that it has it does exactly, that it kind of plays this role in advance? Then the space doesn't tell you anything about, computations and what insights you get from parameterizing them. It more just serves as this kind of semi-formal way to do Platonism, which seems less helpful than trying to parameterize computation.
Right. Any other thoughts, Nick, Łukasz?
I don't know, maybe we can look at the quality of information exchange. Like the information exchange within Earth or within biospheres. There's different characters than information exchange between Earth and space, which is mostly thermal. I think. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, there's some component, yeah, where for some kinds of computation, Earth is very rich, and a cloud of gas is not very rich. Right, guys. So getting to the hour mark. So any other questions or comments that?
Yeah. What is Homelander?
Homelander is a character in a series that everyone should see called The Boys.
Yeah, you should watch it.
In my opinion, one of the best series ever made. Definitely the best superhero movie, TV show ever made, in my opinion.
What? That's quite a statement. I mean, especially that now that the
I
sample
agree.
size is just
You agree, right,
increasing.
Łukasz? Yeah,
I agree. Yeah.
we can be friends.
What's good about it?
So what's good is that it takes everything wrong with superhero fatigue and makes it into a great show.
But what are some things that are wrong?
I mean,
Wrong with
I'll
it?
just
I don't
just sell
follow
it
this. I
without
don't follow
without
this
spoiling,
at
because
all.
I mean I'll just say that
Like
it's
there are still people who just do that, who just try to do their job.
so it's taking superheroes as realistically as possible, basically. So you take the premise of, okay, this guy can fly, sure, whatever. I mean, that's, dubious physically, but not impossible in some sense, right? It's not breaking any laws of physics just by the fact that it's flying, right? Obviously, there's no mechanism that is shown to why this guy flies, but by the virtue of this guy flying. So in that sense, I mean, they push the laws of physics a bit more than just flying, but they are all very consistent. They are trying to be as physically correct as possible, and they take it to the absolute obvious extreme that you would imagine being physically accurate. And it gets this. It's more of a. So it's more than a. It's a superhero show. I mean, it's about superheroes and superpowers and things like that. But it's more like a. It's more like an industrial intrigue thriller than a superhero movie. So and that's what I think is the great twist or the great take on the genre of superheroes. It's almost like Disney running Marvel. If Marvel superheroes were the actors playing the characters in the movies, that's kind of the quickest way to put it. It's great. I mean, that's all I can say. I mean, it's, have you seen it, Nick?
Yeah, sure.
You liked it, right?
Of course. Yeah.
But it says here, and this is Wiki, but maybe Wikipedia is biased against this particular guy, which does happen. It says Homelander is an egotistical and sadistic narcissist
Correct.
who serves as an extremely powerful leader of the Seven. This is the guy you guys are gonna call if I get in trouble?
Yeah, because you're American and he's supposed to defend Americans. I would be calling on my own. Actually, fun fact, guys. The actor. This would be funnier for Nick and Łukasz that's seen the series, I guess.
Then.
But the actor playing Homelander came to my hometown last year, got drunk, got into a fight with a guy, and got arrested here. It's pretty random, but it like, and I was not far from where this happened. It was like it's so random. The memes of distraction said, "I thought we were supposed to call Saul." It's pretty funny as well.
I mean, look, if I disappear, call everyone, within reason. I mean, don't pay like a 1-800. Don't pay. But yeah, anyone who you can call who can help save me, that would be good.
I mean, I will also do the most American thing of sending thoughts and prayers.
Yeah,
That doesn't
yeah,
help. I don't know
or
what
like
could.
you could put a sign in front of your lawn that says "Save James." Sending thoughts and
By
prayers.
the way, when you said Homelander, I first thought of Highlander because he's Scottish.
Oh right, of course, of course. Yeah,
I think that's what I thought too. Yeah.
there's so many
Yeah.
people going to Scotland just to see the Highlander stuff. Never watched it. Right, guys.
Anyway, that was my only question.
There's some nice pop culture high note in the end.
Yes, yes. In case nothing else struck home, hopefully Carlos and everyone explaining basic pop culture to me, everyone explaining American pop culture to me, in all irony, is yeah. Hopefully, at least you like that. All right, guys. All right. See you later.
See you next week, everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.